Léirigh an cosar bullag fud chun le Fort Láirge in 1923 a raibh ná donna heicmí bhhuichte in éireann uair nua neamhsplach. Ní raibh ag na hÉireann ferma bochta ach chun lámh go dtí an béal, agus iarú arthú Ghlac le tríon dá túras dal suairch.
In Waterford, there were two major strikes. One was in 1922 when labourers defeated an attempt to introduce wage cuts, and defeated it mainly because of the unsettled conditions in the country at the time, that the farmers weren't able to rely on the army and the police to crush the strike. But in 1923, the situation was more settled, and a major strike began in May.
Thug grúpaí feirmeoirí rogha dá mhuil faoi bhríosairí scebhleóireachta na Bratí Deirge. Bunaíodh glúiseacht saoirse na bheirmeoirí chun cuireannaigh na bagartha sin. I Bort Láirge, d'agrann cuid de na feirmeoirí a ngeard a bán hain a chur scebhla ghníomhairí ceart chumann in Núnáil, sa Chos Néife, I Maileang Bhutléirí agus sa Bhaile Dubh.
The government had anticipated this, and they created a special unit of the army known as the Special Infantry Corps, which was to be deployed in dealing with agricultural unrest. About 600 specials were deployed in Waterford during the farm strike. As well as that, the farmers themselves resorted to terror, and by September of 1923 they had, some of them at least, formed a unit which called itself the White Guards. So you had this kind of miniature version of the Russian Civil War going on in Waterford between the Red Guards and the White Guards. They launched a series of attacks on the homes of Union secretaries, and in some cases they kidnapped Union secretaries and beat them up.
That strike lasted almost a whole year, but again the tables were reversed. Whereas in 1922 the farmers conceded quite easily, in 1923 the agricultural workers were again beaten into the ground. But it was the Free State Army that helped do that and helped overcome the workers. One interesting comment was made by a Labour man coming up towards the end of the strike, was that we neither have clothes, we have no food, and taking a box of matches out of his pocket, he said, but we have these. And that was sort of alluding to the fact that on many occasions hay sheds were burdened and fields were burdened, you know.
Ainneoin gur thug an fórsa speisialatha armtha a seolalathachú a bhaile áclaí a cosint dóibh, fós hain dulling roinnt feirmeoirí díaltas. Bhí a gcuid stóras fér mar haragad ag na hÉireann mar hlí éifeachta chun freagart don imagla sa thugad cráite cníte seo. Ach ní fada eile a bharthach anghníomhaíocht radacach. Faoi mar a hála sa Rúise, chuir lucht nó brúrúpa láidir na bheirmeoirí agus níos tábhachtaí fós an Aglis in Réabhlóid hóisialta de Heiser be, leasú fiúháin.
The church would be what as my mother used to say, dead down on anybody who was talking about Bolshevism or strikes or communism or anything like that. The church, by its nature, would have to be pro the farmers, because, as I say, most of the leaders of the church at the time were strong farmers' sons. Because if you remember again, if you had to make a priest, you had to pay his fees in the seminary. You couldn't afford to pay his fees in the seminary if you were a working man.
Faoi dhearán 1923, bhí éaróid folaíochta na hÉireann athraithe bhain dochreidte. Níor tugadh ardá laiad oibritheí cheannairí glúiseacht an lucht oibre le linn chogadh na saoirse. Bhí saoirse aníos acu, mar ja. Séach an bás áil den ochras, séach an bád bán a hógans. Na hinstitúí sin a ra an neamhspláchas chun fáil réileo, a bhunaíoch faoi bhratach nua iad. In áiteanna nos chilmhigh máisín, chuir teach na mocht sclábhathe oibre fáil. Túthe a hÉireann ná mar a hála faoi na Brittany, iad ina n-oibrithe, ina searbhóntaí agus ina sclábhathe gnéis.
Well, there was sexual molestation going on as well. Like, I mean, girls could be hired into farmers' places and there might be no woman in the house and only an old grumpy old farmer and you don't know what went on. So, I mean, in actual fact, that's what gave the nuns the impetus to come to Kilmacthomas and try and educate girls, try and get them out of the hiring field because there was all sorts of ill treatment happening from the hiring fair. And then again, you see, these people are so poor that they couldn't afford not to take the hire for the year, you know. This woman came back to me 5 years ago. She'd been in Canada and she came back to say, oh, I'll come back, she said, to see where my parents came from, she said. And my father was such a fella. Oh, I said, he was never married. I know, she said. Oh, here's your mother. Oh, my mother was sent away, she said. But she was hired into a house, and her mother was hired into a house as a domestic servant, like. And this girl had a child by the man in the house, and she was sent off. The mother was giving the money to go to America. The child was sent to the workhouse.
Bhí drochra Hionóntán na Malta is na Garracha. Chuaigh sláinte an phobal in Olcas. Bhí fórmhór na mocht an níos measa as ná mar a bhí 5 bliain a roimhe sin. Faoin na 1960, 10 bliain in ní an neamhspláchais, bhí go leor taileach ag marachtáil go beobucht na slumí sin, a bhí ina nábhar scanal nár ba iad na Brittany ba chúisló. Trá cinúnach is stair na hÉireann ba é. Dá mé ceannairí an lucht oibre tar éis taú leis na Sóivéidí, cá bhís cén tora a bhéach ar sin.
The North was there to be won because the northern working class, Protestant and Catholic, had shown tremendous combativity from 1919 especially. But 1920 you had a man, Sam Kyle, who advocated home rule for Ireland, but he was a labour activist, and the kind of home rule he wanted was a socialist one, where workers had a high standard of living and control over their work process. And he stood in the Shankill and he topped the poll.
Dá mar rud é go raibh stratéis agus Clár agus fís agus agrú den tórt sin curta faoi bhráid lucht oibre na tíre, chuaigh agus heas. Diaad faoi imthúrimse glúiseacht den tais ceanna a chuir grí is a hála sa Rúise in éideag sa seachtaíoch.
The militancy of the working class wasn't lacking. It was absolutely there. It's not so well known about, but once you look into it, you find it. You find hundreds of Soviets, and you find 4 major general strikes in this era. So the militancy is not there, but what is lacking is a perspective of consolidating this militancy, of organising it on a 32-county basis to defeat the British administration.
Ní thar lócan Chogadh catharga, dá mar rud é go mbeadh an ceannaireacht tucha ag lucht oibre don tríd náisiúnta agus sóisialta ins na blianta roimhe sin. Tubaist agus tep a bhí insan Chogadh catharga nóid, agus caithfar chud mór den phleagadh a chur dhúilne ceannairí lucht oibre na tíre.
Seachtain seo ich amárach ar TG Cead bagart díonta ar bhilí ar Rosnarún na Ghlac agus ní stirlíonn sin patnaí is Rosmach agus síl na coirúlacht a mástan ar mabs ver acu ag ceirmhaigh si de bígí linn.